Thanks for coming on the podcast. It's good to have you, have you to share a little bit of your knowledge and experience.
No, I mean, thank you for having me. Thank you for reaching out. And I definitely agree with that. That's something that's missing with the industry right now. A lot of social media is very polarizing and like kind of get that idea behind like that's how you have to be in the industry when a lot of that's not true. So there's a lot of in between that a lot of these people that seem polarizing don't actually believe they're actually very in between. But
Yeah,
good
definitely.
podcast is a great way to have that in between.
So before we get too deep into this thing, let's have you introduce yourself.
I'm Baily Forst. I'm an assistant sports performance coach at Western Carolina University. Um, Recently graduated with my master's from Sacred Heart University. I got here at Western Carolina in June. Kind of stepped into that role pretty fast. I work with football is my number one. From there, I go baseball, work with women's golf, and I work with all of track and field here.
Gotcha.
Yeah, that's my main priorities right now.
Gotcha. Yeah, and it's cool to have that kind of diversity in sports, not just having one thing or not just kind of only working with male population, like having different people to work with kind of different goals. I think it's a really, it helps whenever you can see it's like, oh, I never thought about using this for this situation, but I think it's very very beneficial to just kind of get and it's not just in strength conditioning, but anything in life. Try to diversify anywhere you can. You're going to be able to pull, one idea over to the next thing, and really, I think that's where you get kind of revolutions and things. When you can think outside the
Mhm.
box and have different experiences. Kind of going back in time though, were sports yourself? Was that the entry into kind of this whole interest starting, or what was it for you?
Sports was definitely the entry into the field of strength conditioning for me. I kind of got to the end of my competitive career as far as team sports goes in high school. Played football, soccer, ran track, a couple different things here and there. I also powerlifted in high school, but kind of going into college, I just needed something to be somewhat competitive. So I started doing CrossFit a little bit. And then from CrossFit, I was like, well, I need to be good at Olympic lifting. So I started just using YouTube, teaching myself how to Olympic lift. And while I was in the rec center of my college, teaching myself how to Olympic lift, one of the guys that worked there was like, hey, do you want to, like learn from an actual coach? It's like, that'd be awesome. So he invited me to his gym like a couple weeks later. On one Saturday, went to his gym and then kind of joined their Olympic lifting team. From there, one of the other coaches that worked there, he was an aspiring strength coach. And I just ended up joining him for a couple sessions at the high school that he worked at and kind of just fell in love with the idea of strength conditioning. And so started kind of reaching out to high schools, got some high school jobs, branched out from there, kept on building up. I think it's very important to have some sort of experience going into whatever it was, especially a lot of people are looking for GAs out of being interns and everything. I think being a high school strength coach was the best thing I ever did. I enjoyed it a lot. Everywhere I did work, it was pretty structured, at least from the standpoint of during the summer. Summer training was very structured. Like as you would see in a normal collegiate setting, there's just less equipment in the places I worked at. It wasn't the nicest places, which I also think was a great experience having that, not having the same stuff, not having access to everything. But just the only thing that would be different about it was just during the school year, training just looked different. Guys would come in whenever they had that weightlifting class or whatever it was, but everybody was required to take some sort of class where they had that. So we were able to get the training still in during that school year.
So when you get to utilize more technology in a strength conditioning setting and utilize more equipment and stuff like that, how did that affect you?
kind of not having that stuff makes it you rely more on like your connection with the athlete, your relationships that you build with them. But getting technology never really changed much for me. That was still my base foundation as a coach, was like, okay, I'm gonna have a connection with my athlete and make sure that they know and trust that I care about them and know what I'm talking about, know the best interest for them, whatever that is. Technology kind of just was like a little icing on the cake. It kind of like reassured them that, okay, we are doing the right thing. We are looking at the same stuff or whatever it is.
What are some of those technologies that you have access to that do kind of make things maybe just a little bit easier, a little bit more analytical?
Probably number one thing that I have access to that I've enjoyed using a lot is going to be gym aware, using some velocity based training. I think in season, it's a massive help in kind of determining where we are in a given day, assessing load, whatever that is. I'm also a big fan of using some sort of timing gate system. I've loved having access to that stuff because on the field stuff is a little more where I'm leaning during in season. So I'm testing that stuff a lot more. So timing gate's going to make that just a little more fluid, a little more seamless and reliable throughout the year. Then another thing that I use quite a bit is just going to be a jump mat. I know some coaches aren't really big fans of jump mats. I like using them just because it's a very quick number I can get from it. I know it's not like, oh, this is your vertical jump. This is how good you are. But at least it's a consistent number for me. And I can kind of use that number. Is it going up or is it going down?
And I think that's a big point you kind of brought up, like using it as a tool and not kind of letting it take the place of the strength and conditioning coach. I
Mhm.
think that's a big point. And also just kind of this idea of like everybody having almost defensive position, super defensive position about how they do things in the weight room, just because there's so many people like on social media, you know, on Twitter and Instagram who, you know, you post something up, a video or, you know, just of what you're doing or something. And, you know, it's crazy how many people jump all over, you know, this is stupid. This is the worst thing. Like, why are you doing it like that? You know, you know, it's a crazy online world that we're kind of living in when it comes to, I think, just the lack of actual, like, instead of like criticizing, you know, giving your 2 cents on it, you know, saying, well, if it was me, this is what I would do. How have you, you know, do you kind of view that at all or much, you know, the social media side of the strength conditioning world, or do you try to stay away from it?
I mean, I definitely see it. I don't really like partake in it as much. I'm not a big social media person when it comes to like, I want to go debate somebody. I'm kind of just, I'm a big, just, I'll post what we're doing. If like, take it how it is. Like, if you agree with it, don't agree with it, whatever it is. But if you want to talk about it, we'll talk about it. I like to have those conversations just a little more in person or like just voice to voice so that you can actually have some sort of easier dialogue than just text. But I definitely see it. And I think it's fine if you want to have your opinion, you're going to have your opinion on whatever it is. Because even within our own staff, like we all have differing opinions on, okay, hey, like this is how I would teach this, or this is how I would teach this. Um, because at the end of the day, like every team is different, every athlete's different. So if
Yeah.
you're getting results that you're looking for, then that's really all that matters.
Yeah. And it is cool. Like I was kind of mentioning that different aspect, like, you know, what do you think you pull the most from working with different teams, you know, instead of just having, you know, one set of people that you work with?
Probably number one thing is you just see a lot of different things that you may not have expected at first. So you're learning like different cues of whatever it is, or you're learning, okay, hey, like this exercise didn't work for this person. Maybe we try this, and like it started working for them. And kind of just learning how to adjust depending on the person, just obviously because so many people are so different and you're getting a good volume of people. So you're going to learn a lot pretty fast as far as let's change things up if we need to change things up.
Do you see kind of a more willingness or more enthusiasm from any particular, you know, just percentage wise, any particular team?
Well, I mean, football obviously has that like long time culture, lifting culture. So it's not very difficult to really get them in the weight room and get them like having a good time lifting, time of the year dependent. But I've never had a huge difficulty with the team wanting to come in and lift. Surprisingly enough, like even my golf teams that I've had over the years, like they love coming in and lifting. Once you kind of like show them what they're capable of, then it's like, oh, okay, like this is pretty cool. Like they're doing things they've never done before. So it's not really like something where it's been like, oh, it's super difficult for one team versus another. It's kind of just going to be, I think it's person to person more than a team.
It's crazy to look at different sports and be like, football players are bigger, like just stereotyping, football players are bigger than people that golf, maybe baseball players, are lean, they have, lean muscle. They're pretty long. Like, and I think that goes such a long way kind of in that aspect of like a golfer being maybe a little bit more hesitant. Like, okay, I see all these professional, maybe not as much these days, but like, professional golfers that are maybe they're in quote unquote good shape, but they're not lean, or they're not, you know, they don't have big muscles. Like you
Mhm.
kind of see it more these days a little bit, I think, but like just kind of going back to like the culture of the sport, it's so, you know, crazy to me to think about where the sport may go now that you're kind of getting more of that into the sport.
Yeah, for sure. I mean, it's kind of like this wave that you see, like football kind of started the whole side of strength conditioning, and now people are seeing the benefits of it. And then you have basketball hopping on, you have baseball hopping on, softball hopping on, and slowly like sports are trying to see starting to see like the real benefits behind what they're doing. And I think it's been great. Like I've seen just over the course of my time with my teams, is that more coaches are like, okay, like I want them to spend more time with you. Like normally golf team giving me 2 days a week. Now I'm getting three. I even like my coach even was like, hey, once the fall season's over, like let's go 4 days a week. So more willing to be like, okay, hey, like let's push this a little bit more. Let's get something more out of this. And I think when you see that from a coaching perspective, like the athletes are way more likely to be like, oh, hey, like if we're spending this much time here, it probably means something.
Yeah. And it's interesting you say that because it kind of jogged like a thought in my head of like, there's definitely, you can't just train as much as, if you get motivated, that seems like what people always want to do. But there's such a, obviously, I mean, not telling you something you don't know, there's such an importance of how can we recover as well. I mean, in a world where a coach says, and it would be tough, but I'm going to bring these players to you 7 days a week or 6 days a week, whatever. What would you, if anything, if you said, okay, like what would you do for those days where you didn't train? Would you have like a specific thought, like, okay, this is how we're going to kind of recover as a team, or this is how we're going to, get better without necessarily training hard?
I think at that point, it's a lot of just like microdosing things. I'd probably use a lot of that time as like education, because that's one thing we've talked about as a staff is like, let's educate our athletes more. We actually start scheduling nutrition talks and everything like that with our teams so that we can give some sort of education to them about recovery modalities. And then, yeah, just breaking up the sessions and kind of putting those recovery modalities within the session themselves. So I can do whatever it is each day. If I want to foam roll, if I want to kind of do a little bit more mobility circuits, some band stretching, whatever it is. I've never been someone that's like super, okay, like we have to foam roll, we have to band stretch. I'm more of like, let's figure out whatever makes you comfortable, whatever makes you feel like you're feeling better for that session. Like let's do that. Let's make sure we're staying active in that, whatever it is. And then we can do whatever we need to do to prepare for that session.
Yeah, I think the world of like the recovery side of things is definitely growing. And I think one thing that I predict in the near future is having a specific kind of recovery coach or a sleep recovery coach, something that you know is on each staff. I think there's just so much possible benefit to, a say for instance, a football team, especially somebody, or a team that has to go through, week in and week out, like a football team who has, getting hit and, their body's sore and, how can we even just recover from week to week from games, forget training. Like, I think, I don't know. I just think that's kind of the next big move. And I don't know if it's, in a year or anything, but I think that's kind of the same way that, strength conditioning came into it. And then you saw, the diet side of things go into sports a lot more. I think, I really do think it's sleep and recovery is the next kind of coach that's going to be populating.
Yeah. This is pretty interesting take. I would definitely agree that like it's a major part of recovery. Um, One thing that we look at a ton or we talk about a ton is nutrition. We have two registered nutritionists, and then we have two other coaches that have masters in nutrition. So that's a big part of our kind of education, that recovery side of things. Hey, let's make sure that we're getting this done. We're fueling ourselves as athletes and not just eating whatever we want each day. As eating what you want is important, but let's make sure we're getting the right things in our body to make sure we are getting the most out of what we're doing in the weight room. And then from just a recovery standpoint, I'm huge on just the system as a whole, getting the whole system moving, getting blood flow going. I think a lot of times we spend a lot of time on like localized modalities, which are great in specific circumstances. But if I'm just generally a football player that's sore after a game, we just need to get moving, get the blood flowing, kind of get a good sweat in, and then start working into that other stuff after.
Going to like the nutrition side of things, though, what do those conversations look like between you and somebody, on the nutrition staff?
We just talk about, if we're looking at an individual athlete, the first thing we're going to look at is like, okay, where are they at right now? And where do we think we need them to be come season, whatever that is? So wherever they're at, we'll assess like, how are they moving? Are they moving well? Could they be faster? Are they a little too slow or whatever it is that they specifically need for their sport? We'll kind of assess that, see what we can do with them, what their goal might be, and then we'll look at, well, what are they currently eating? We'll take a log of about like 3-4 days, see what they're eating, how they're eating, and then kind of just make adjustments based on that, wherever that needs to go. If it needs to be like, okay, we need to be eating more, or we need to be pulling back a little bit, or we can kind of keep on doing what we're doing and just see, are we getting the results we're looking for? I'm big on just using the scale on, okay, hey, let's just keep on looking. Like, are we trending up? Are we trending down? Or are we staying the same? And then what I recently started doing is taking body comp pictures. So that's regular kind of, okay, well, we've made progress here. Like, unfortunately, don't have access to super nice body comp testing to test body fat. But I think just pictures in itself are useful in being like, okay, hey, like I did make an actual physical change to myself.
Right. Yeah. And I think that's such an important area, obviously. How do you, when it comes to, and maybe it's not something that you specifically do as much, but do you do anything to keep them, individual athletes motivated, or do you give them any type of analytics when it comes to like their current diet and how their training's going? Like, how do you kind of keep them on it? Because it's something everybody struggles with, is just staying consistent with what they're putting in.
It's a big topic, I feel like, with athletes, especially over the course of the entire year. I think especially with football, how often they train, like they're there for the summer. I think really the only time they get off is as soon as the season's over, they get winter break off. Um, Similar with basketball, except basketball doesn't even get winter break off. Like they're playing all the way through that. So I feel like a big portion of that is going to be teammates, how our teammates kind of staying together, motivating them. And the way I personally kind of motivate through training sessions is going to be just having like little competitions here and there, whatever that is, whatever that may be for the day, just kind of like insert a little competition. And then I also like to use like some sort of analytics, as far as I'll use the jump mat a lot, med ball throws, and turn that into a little bit of competition. But then I'll also be like, okay, hey, you threw this med ball 14 yards last week and you did it 16 yards this week. Just using those little things as sprint testing, whatever that is, as just those little markers of like, hey, like you did improve. Like everything you just did for the last 2, 3 weeks, like did actually do something for you.
Yeah, I think that's such a necessary component of the motivation side is just like realizing that you are making progress. And as an athlete, you have so much stuff going on. You have your training, you have your practice, you have your school, your personal life, just all kinds of stuff. And I can't imagine. I never was an athlete at that level. And um, just the amount of pressure that must build up. And when it comes to like the mental side of things, is that anything that you deal with as well, like trying to not necessarily like counsel them, but like you know being aware of it, I guess. Do you have anything that you do when you're kind of more aware, like, oh, this person might be struggling because of all this different stuff they have going on?
It's definitely something that like you'll begin to notice. I think as you start to build relationships with your athletes, you'll be able to understand like their tendencies and see like, okay, hey, they're kind of acting a little off today. You can talk to them a little bit about that and kind of get some insight on it. I think it's actually really important. I would say it's kind of just literally just asking an athlete each day, like, how are you doing? You feeling all right? Or especially after big days, you just got done with a scrimmage or just got done with a game or whatever it is, and you're coming in, hey, like you feeling okay? Everything going all right? If they're moving a little slower, whatever it is, kind of just understanding their tendencies over time and understanding how that might fluctuate for them depending on what's going on in their life.
Kind of the fluctuation, going to kind of the team side and the culture side. For high school and for college, you typically have someone 4 years, 3 years maybe. But how do you keep that, like, that culture when you do have some players leaving and some players coming in?
I think that just comes down to always holding your standard, whatever your standard is for your team, and making sure that like that standard is not coming from you as a coach, but that standard has been ingrained into your athletes. So any player leaving takes that standard with them, but then any player coming in also sees, okay, so like this is how it's ran here. They're not all of a sudden like, okay, like I can do whatever I want because this is what we did wherever I was. They're stepping into something that's like, no, this is how it's ran. This is what we do here. And this is kind of the culture that we want this team to be at.
I think we all have this idea on the outside looking in, what we think something's going to be like. But what was that for you? Like, what was the biggest maybe misconception or like whoa moment when you first kind of got into your first major role?
I mean, everybody knows like the hours that it takes to be in a collegiate weight room and serve as many teams as we serve. But I think until you actually do it and you're actually like solely responsible for these teams, like there's not necessarily the success or failure, but like their time in the weight room and time on the field, whatever that is, like it's dependent on you. There's nobody else backing you up. That kind of really hit me as a GA. Like I'm working with 5 teams, and these are solely responsible. I'm solely responsible for these 5 teams. On top of that, also working with football, assisting with basketball. So it's really that kind of hits you pretty hard. You're like, oh, like this is what I have to do. And sometimes, like especially as a GA, comes down to, okay, am I programming for this team tonight, or am I gonna get this essay or homework done or whatever it is? Like usually, well, I'll tell you 100% of the time it came down to the program for this team.
Yeah, it's funny. Do you have any like any way to kind of like cope with that? Like, do you talk to other strength conditioning coaches? Do you do anything to kind of say, hey, this is kind of what I'm experiencing, and how would you deal with this? Like, do you have any like mentors in the strength conditioning world?
I definitely have some really good mentors. Luckily, I've always been a part of like really close staffs with each other, pretty big staffs too. So like we always talk. whatever's going on. Like we'll talk through things like, hey, I had this thing going on with my team. Like, how would you deal with that? Like, what would be the best way to work around this? Or, hey, I'm thinking about doing this. I have this idea. Like, what do you think? So luckily, I've always been a part of staffs like that where I can kind of bounce ideas off of them. And it's kind of like one of those things like, if you need to vent, the best person to vent to is someone that understands your situation.
How would you, if you had to have something to not necessarily fix, but hope gets better, or something that you would improve on within the within your career, just to not just in your own personal experience, but like as a industry, or as a strength conditioning as a whole, what would you hope kind of gets better along your career?
As an industry, I think probably kind of just seeing the industry grow and as it's doing right now, the importance of it kind of becoming to light, how it's useful for every single sport. And then from that aspect is like, okay, well, if this is this important for every single sport, then maybe we need to invest a little bit more into it. We need to kind of invest into the people and whatever that is for them. Because I think if you look across the board, I think every single staff would say, hey, we're probably a little understaffed. We could use a little help, or underpaid, whatever that is. So that would be the biggest thing for me, is kind of like, let's, as long as we keep on understanding the importance of it, hey, let's invest in the people that are getting this done for us, that are serving our student athletes.
And I think so many different so many different industries are feeling that right now, specifically just that understaffed, and having to do so much more right now.
Mhm.
Hopefully that definitely gets better though. And I think strength conditioning specific, I think it is going to get better as we, more science, because I think that's where kind of the funding does come from, is whenever you get
Mhm.
these hard kind of scientific, research studies being done, like, oh, this helps for this. And, I think we're definitely headed, I think, in a good direction. So, um, if you had any advice, for anyone coming up and interested in the world of strength conditioning, what would that advice be?
I mean, it's definitely one of those fields where you gotta put your head down and kind of get the work done. But I think what I've come to realize over the past like couple years is you still gotta like live your life. It can't always be 100% like my work, my job, like my teams. I love my teams. I love everything about them. I love working with them. But you do need time for yourself. You do need time to relax, wind down a little bit. Like take the time. If whatever that is that you enjoy, like you got to take that time, or else you're gonna burn out pretty fast. So have that balance of, hey, like I want to go do this for a little bit, and then I can come back to work in a second.
Yeah, that's good advice. I think just around the board, people are so worried about, grinding and all this, and that's good to do, but you also have to worry about your own, your own life and your own health at some point. You definitely, whenever you take some time off, I think you do come back better, and you come back maybe a little fresher, more creative, able to solve that problem that was kind of just facing you for a while. But yeah, man, that's I think really good advice, and appreciate you coming on tonight. Appreciate you sharing a little bit about your experience, and what's going on in the world of strength conditioning, and all that good stuff. It was good to meet you and get to talk to you.
Yeah, I appreciate you having me. I thank you so much for the opportunity.
Definitely. And if you want to, you can share where people can find you on social media or wherever else.
My social media across the board is just at Coach B Forst.
I'll put that in the description. Go check it out. Once again, thanks for coming on. And it was good to get to talk to you, have a conversation, learn a little bit myself, and just about what's going on out there in the world of strength conditioning.
Yeah, thank you for having me.